introduce Major General Jeremy Vearey, who's the retired head of detectives for the Western Cape, former intelligence officer in anti-gang units, represents South Africa in Interpol conferences. He is also a writer and publisher of 2 books, with 2 more on the way. Those being Jeremy Funny Elsie's, based on growing up in Elsie's River, and Into Dark Waters, based on his personal experiences as an intelligence officer, detective, and station commander. If you want to know more about the books, you can always talk to Mr. Bookbanks about them. Here's the details.
Good afternoon. An additional sources reference that you can also get from Mr. Bookbanks is a manual I wrote while I trained intelligence officers to infiltrate the numbers game. In it you will find all the terminology, all the 3 types of languages spoken, all the codes and every piece of information about the game possible. But for the purpose of this discussion, it would be too long for me to go into all those details. But just a short history. When you open up the newspaper today, you see 28, 26, 27, it's become so part of gang folklore on the Cape Flats that we hardly remember where it came from. And we have begun to misunderstand it as a purely criminal gang that emerged down in London. I'm going to be telling you the story about the organized crime cult, which is the oldest one in this country. Okay? But before I come to that, I want to quote the 28 gang general, Mahadin Wenzel, who was the prime subject for a book by Johnny Steinberg called The Number. And when he was confronted and said that somebody else wrote a book about this, Professor Charles van Onselen, who is at UCT, once wrote about the story of Longoloza. His real name was José Matagula. Mahadin Wenzel said, and I quote, there is the black man's story and there is the white man's story. And if you go around telling Van Onselen's story to us in prison, we will kill you and Van Onselen. This history of the number that we have, it says, it is like a power that we are prepared to die and kill for our story. Now, if you look at what he's saying, it almost borders on believing something, like approaching it like a religion. And I'll tell you what, the Mzuzepi Mategola that Charles van Onselen wrote about, and that Mahadin Wenzel worships as the god of the number, the true prophet of the number, is the man they would ultimately call Longalosa, maybe here on the Cape. Meaning in Zulu, man with the crooked eyes. You could see right into your soul. Now the story of this man is, he was a real person. And he was a young person around about the 1880s, 1890s. He was born in the Maritzburg region. He went to work on the mines in Newcastle, and then felt that this is not the type of work to him. He was recruited by an old man called Paul Mabaza, who ran a cult called the Ninevites. Now the Ninevites were a group of people who literally lived underground in cities. In other words, they lived in caves, they lived in sewers, and their job was to come out at night after sun set to rob people, mine workers on the way home, and also break into houses in KwaZulu-Natal, the northern parts of KwaZulu-Natal in particular. This is who he did. He was arrested and went to prison. And he first went to a prison called Point Road Prison in Durban. And at Point Road Prison, he decided, wait, he's going to form a new gang system out of prisons. And he formed what we call the numbers gangs today. He started with the 28 numbers gang, and he called himself, according to the prison warden records at the time, the Nkosi. He was the king of the numbers gang. And while in prison, he was started off the 28s. And the reason he called the 28s because when he had been outside, his gang consisted of 7 people plus him, and counting together it was 8. But in order to disguise this, when they speak about it in code language, they mention the term 28. When he came to prison, he realized that he was well known, him and the gang members who were arrested, the 8 of them, but they're going to have to meet the conditions that they face in prison. The authorities, the prisons were cruel at that time, with violence. And in it he met a man called Grant Shezi. Grant Shezi had the nickname Kilekejana. And the criminal history of Grant Shezi is he also ran a band of robbers, but they were 6 people plus 1 person, including himself. And he was then christened his group, the 27 gang. And his speciality was daylight robbery when he was outside. So they brought these 2 systems in one. After sunrise, 27 go out in the day, and 28 after sunset to do the business. But while they ran into a third, who was then classified as colored, even back then, in Point Road Prison in Durban, and he was a Mr. Gray. And Mr. Gray, speciality, when he was outside and while sentenced to come into prison, was armed robberies and confident street screams. And Mr. Gray was in prison with 5 people of his gang, with him being the 6th, and Mr. Gray became, his nickname was Chico, and he became the 26th gang. So that's how they were formed into number system. However, the then Commissioner of Prison was so worried about this organized gang because after they formed in Point Road Prison, this cult spread to all prisons. Cinderella Prison, Barberton Prison, all over, even down to Robben Island Prison at that point in time. It spread all over, and it had this structure, almost of a government. The 28s called themselves lawmakers, and they fought. They were the power in prison. The 26s, because of their confident street screens and their skill in smuggling, became in charge of smuggling all goods into prison and handling back, and selling drugs in particular. Like then it was done. The 27s were soldiers, pure and pure. The 27s were men of blood. They called themselves men of blood. Their job is to take the blood of the authorities and whoever is their enemies. Now, who are their enemies? Even back in the early 1900s, their enemies were what they called the Mapuza, which is the authorities, or borders or the police, natural classified enemy, even till today. And what they call the French, the France. Now the France, according to them, in their words in Zulu, were mpatas. In other words, stupid people. The France are in prison because prison belongs to the number gangs, had absolutely no right to any property on them. In other words, if they came to prison with shoes, for example, it's a common thing, even till today, that tradition goes forth. The 26s are the people who will first approach you. And they will ask you, listen, I see you wearing some pair of shoes my uncle gave to me 2 weeks ago. And that shirt my mother gave to me the last time. They always have a video. Strange way of approaching you. And thank you for keeping it for me, but I need it back. Obviously, in your confusion, you will either get what they call haraha, in which case you will be beaten up immediately, or you will volunteer to give what belongs to them back to you. So nothing belongs to you as a France. Okay? So that's the important things about the 26 gang. The 27 gang you hopefully will never encounter in your life. If you find yourself in prison, because they only see blood and they only react violently to situations. However, the men of power in prison, the men of laws, the 28s who maintain order, not only over the government, but they mimic a normal domestic household life. In other words, they have wives, which are often the younger men who get protected by them, who get pulled into their ranks, and they have a particular division for those men, for those young men whom they call veifis in Afrikaans. And they call that what they call in their mythology the silver line. I'm going to come to the silver line and where it comes from. And they are, as soldiers, the golden line. There's 2 lines in the 2 lines. Now, talking about the silver line is quite important. Going back to the 1900s, I don't know if you know, South Africa was like the Wild West. In the post-war South African War, the early 1900s, now they're outside of prison, and they're bringing these structures outside. You had gangs and bandits roaming the Gauteng region, around the mines. There were soldiers from the Irish Brigade, run by a chap called McLaughlin, who formed his own band of soldiers because Britain didn't want them to go back. They were afraid from Manchester. And they had their own bandit group that went around doing heists at mines or payrolls, and also robbing business people and stagecoach drivers. So I just want to suggest the climate to you. It was a very different kind of world. You had the numbers gangs being outside after being formed, still using this identity of Ninevites, also involved in payroll robberies and mine robberies and robbing of mine workers who travel home from Newcastle, where they work in the coal mines, and also from the gold mines. And we had large bands of bandits roaming this country. There was one particular bandit that the 28 decided to bring into their ranks. It's a man called Joseph Silver from Manchester. Joseph Silver's speciality was prostitution. He ran all of the brothels in Johannesburg, and in the Pretoria region, and he was protected by the government. Okay? He also, what was unique at the time, he ran brothels of young boys also, and he supplied it to rich clients throughout the country. Joseph Silver was also one of those people who came here during the Anglo-Boer War, and the UK, Britain, didn't want him back, like they didn't want the Irish Brigade back. So we had quite a large kind of tradition of banditry at the particular point in time. So what I'm trying to tell you, these gangs, like the numbers, emerge in the context of entire lawlessness. We did not have a police force like we had. In actual fact, our first detective was an Irishman. Paul Kruger appointed him. However, in the 2 weeks after his appointment, he was corrupted and he started running protection rackets and Joseph and he helped Joseph Silver to recruit prostitutes for the brothels. So the relationship with law enforcement and the number is entrenched, that corrupt tradition is a long thing. But coming to that, and just jumping to that, the first important thing you need to understand, you're not dealing with the normal gang. Those police officers, every year, I'm ex and they still ask me, I get called to every parole hearing of people we put away 25, 30 years ago, and I have to be explained to the parole board why that person should still stay there. So I do know the sexy voice. But don't confuse this brother, their own voice, with the real one, the Michael voice. The one who says multiple sentences repeatedly. A man who could easily, in one day, be convicted him for 8 murders that he committed in 4 hours in one day. Okay. This is who he was. 26 fighting against. Okay? His brother, who inherited the empire, ought to know his time is not going to last long because the money, as I said, when you're a general and you come out of prison, who does it belong to? Them. And it doesn't matter whether you were a brother or a sister, the number comes first. The number is your only family. And there has been conflict with his brother. Hits were given and hits were cancelled, all those kind of things. But that's part of the normal business. So I do know the situation of Vearey. There's a story in my book about an undercover operation where they cornered me and another colleague that we dealt with in Vearey, in their territory. Any other questions? Yeah.
I just wanted to ask, so you go to, in a lot of neighborhoods, there are more local gangs. Are those gangs like subsets of the larger ones? For example, if you look at the hard living gangs or the Americans or those type of gangs, are those like smaller gangs of the bigger numbers, or are they self-sufficient?
Before the 1990s, the number had a conference and they changed. So before the 1990s, okay, what was inside, as far as the number stays inside, and what is outside stays outside. In other words, you could not form 28, 26, 27 gangs outside before 1990. Okay? So the gangs that grew outside, like the Americans, the hard livings and all of those things which are in existence for 50 to 60 years, the Mongrels go to well over 70 years, going back to District 6 years. Those gangs would include people who come from the numbers gangs, but people who cannot self-identify outside as the number. And many of the older traditionalists will tell you they don't understand why these people are calling themselves 28, 26, 27 hosts. But what the older people don't understand, that the number was after 1990, the country changed, they had to make certain policy decisions, and we decided 2 significant things now. is they need to extend their empire outside and they need to run things. And that's when you started hearing about 28 gangs outside. The other more important thing was that they admitted once, because it was a new country, so democracy was being born, and the number fell. They needed the skill of white people, but there was an earlier recruitment by the 26 gang in Portsmouth of white people. You know, I don't know, those of you don't know, you might not know, you're too young, but others might remember the master bonds scandal. Now, the head of the master bond scandal was the first white man to be recruited into the 26 gang in the mid-80s. And he was recruited because the 26 gang focused on brilliant schemes that makes money. Because the 26 gang mentality is when they look at you and they will tell the other one, there's money going. You are not you, you are the money. The point is to take it from you. And here came this master bond man, swindled people out of billions, and did the work of the 26 gangs at a scale that they never imagined in the history of the country. And he was recruited, he became a major in the 26 gang. He was promoted quite fast because specialist knowledge. It was found that post-1990, many of the white-collar criminals were literally white. And that they came with certain special skills that was needed for the new environment. If you want to operate in Sea Point or you want to operate in Bryanston and Old Santon, you know, you need these skills and you need people with that savvy. You need people who know the schemes, how to run the schemes. And that's why people are recruited selectively into the 26 gangs. So, and if you refuse, like one other fraudster discovered, you will get hurt. You don't have a choice because you're coming with a new skill, you know? Yeah. So, okay.
Do we have one more round of applause, please?